Hi, everybody. I'm here today with Joel Tosi to talk about growing a organization. And just wanted to say thanks for coming on, Joel. And why don't you tell me a little about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. A little bit about myself. I've been into this kind of like learning space. Probably about 6 or 7 years now. My background is kind of probably like you and a lot of your audience, right? Came up as an engineer. And in those days, you had one career path. Once you were an engineer long enough, you had to become a manager.
Right.
I found out pretty quick I was a horrible manager.
Okay.
And that was like 2000, I don't know, 8 or so. Even maybe like 2006. I started getting into like the whole agile space. I got lucky, kind of ran in a nice group with some friends, David Hussman, Jeff Patton, kind of like pushing different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So I teetered in the agile space, went to Red Hat for a few years as an architect there. And then when I was at Red Hat, I just kind of, Red Hat's got great technology, but I got just kind of tired of it always being technology and never being about problems or products or people. And so I kind of went back into the agile space, doing a lot of tech coaching, those kinds of things. But then like the past, like I said, about 6 or 7 years ago, we started getting into this space where we were teaching courses and teaching, ideas and doing the standard kind of agile coaching stuff where you'd come in once a sprint and say, hey,
Right.
maybe you do this. And then you'd leave and people would just kind of laugh at you and do what they always did. And so we started doing this stuff where instead of worrying about like a process or a way of thinking about things, we just started working directly with teams around being like aware. And then just once you're aware, then you can start saying, what are some things we want to try? And then how do we kind of learn and improve and make that happen and make that not be an anomaly, right? So take that to the next step where it's no longer an anomaly where you only do it when the coach is around. You start doing it all the time. And it was never about like, we have to change the organization overnight because that's just kind of silly. It was about how do you help these teams that are doing the actual work kind of improve their stuff day to day. And then by doing that, you started learning all these things that like the real challenges in organizations, right? Like everybody can be cloud certified, but if all of your security locks down access to everything and they have crazy VPC rules and nobody can do anything, then being in the cloud really doesn't matter, right? Because the problem isn't the cloud. The problem is all these other things.
You're not able to accomplish anything that way.
Yeah. So we just started getting into this learning space where it was just about trying to help people build the things that they wanted to do and not be frustrated working, and then just kind of learn along the way. And people start getting excited about it. So
break down the barriers, right?
What's that?
That kind of sounds like breaking down some barriers and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of we started learning things, like you all know, like there's definitely things teams and people want to learn, but then there's all the things that the organization has to learn that they don't want to acknowledge. Maybe it's a bad idea to have a database team and a testing team and an engineering team. Maybe those are good ideas. So it becomes like this cyclical learning effect, and it's been, I think, more interesting than worrying about certifications or anything like that.
So one of the things you mentioned when you were talking about working with the teams is being aware. And can you unpack that a little bit, and being aware about what and in what ways?
It's a good question. It's about being aware of, I guess I would say, everything. So like I think an easy example, I was working with a team this week, really smart team, and they're doing some really creative mapping things. And one of the things that they were thinking about was, well, we have this mapping solution and we want to give data to the person. The user wants some data. And it's okay. And so at first they were like, let's give them all of the data. And it's like, well, hold on. Like, let's take a pause here. Let's be aware of what we're doing. And it's kind of like, well, what happens if we give them all of the data? Well, then we're done. But what if it's not the right data, or what if it's confusing? Like, let's think through this. Let's not make the problem harder than it needs to be. So sometimes it's being aware of the problem we're trying to solve. Sometimes it's I've done it. Sometimes you're stuck in the moment of trying to finish something, and so you don't really understand something you found on Stack Overflow. you just copy and paste it and jam it in, and you run it, Terraform apply, and you're like, oh, it worked, I'm done.
Right.
And
code compiles, ship it.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes it's just making teams aware of like, well, hold on, I'm glad it worked, but let's make sure we understand it because it's gonna break. And if we don't know how it worked, we're putting ourselves into bad situations. So it's just sometimes being aware of those things. Sometimes it's being aware of the things that are causing us self-harm that we're not even thinking about. The working the extra hours, the thrashing around. We do a lot of work with a good friend, Woody Azul, who's in the mod programming space.
Oh yeah.
And so Woody's a wonderful person, and we talk a lot about the challenges with teams kind of queuing stuff up, and that's almost like self-harm, right? We want to get stuff done, so all we do is we queue up all this stuff in our brain. We're starting this and starting this and starting this, and so sometimes it's making teams aware of that. How much cognitive load are we putting on ourselves that we shouldn't do?
Right.
There's a lot there, but I think it starts with that general awareness of like, what's happening. Let's not react. Let's process what's happening.
Well, so it's really interesting what you're talking about, cognitive load, and you're talking about being aware. And you say be aware of everything, but I think you and I both know you can't be aware of everything.
Yeah.
And so there's clearly a process to learning the things that you need to be aware of, and the things that like should set off alarm bells, and the things that should set off excitement, and things like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that something you work with specifically?
Yeah, it's interesting you call that out. I don't know if we actually explicitly call it out so much as like when we're working with teams and we're trying to get them to learn things, and kind of one of the first things we do to decrease and lower the cognitive load. Mm-hmm. It's going to sound silly, and it might even sound obvious, is we work with whole teams and we focus on single piece flow, single piece of work. Like it's not just because it's the fun thing to do or say. It's because like if there's 5 of us and we're trying to do 5 different things, I guarantee you we're all kind of subconsciously processing different things at the same time. So instead of doing that, let's intentionally start off by lowering the bar, focusing on one thing together. And so we do like a lot of natural mobbing stuff. Mm-hmm. We try and set up, people come up with ideas all the time. Hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so sometimes it's go where the energy is. Sometimes it's table it and parking lot it. Sometimes it's come back to it. Sometimes we'll ask questions around, does that help us now? Or is that something to investigate later on? And so we just try to help the team almost create buckets where they can express it, but then put it somewhere so they don't have to retain it. We do a lot of things visually. Mm-hmm. But to your point, people get excited. Like, this, I want to do this thing with Docker right now. Okay, cool. But does it help us right now? No, but I think it helps us. Okay, let's put it over here. We heard you. Let's see it. Let's just kind of come back and finish this thing, and then get to the next thing, and then get to the next thing. It's a lot of it's. I would say, to your point, it's training to think through things and make the problems smaller, so we can manage them, over and over again. And
one of the things I started off hearing was making sure that you're solving the problem for the customer.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I'm excited about this idea. I want this, but does it actually bring us closer to a solution for the customer?
Yeah. Everything. So when I was, as I mentioned to you, when I was, the early days of engineering and becoming a horrible manager, I did a lot of stuff in the Futures and Options Exchange in Chicago.
Okay.
And I won't get into that too much, but so I did a lot of low latency, high throughput technology, all that fun stuff.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, I mean it was fun, right? But the first time I talked to a trader who I thought was an idiot, I realized how dumb I was. Like I had no idea the things I was doing to them because I thought I was smarter than them as an engineer. And so the reason why I bring that up is everything that when we're trying to create like these learning moments and observations for the teams, we take a thread and the thread is always the outcome from somebody getting value from something. Mm-hmm. You can call it the end user, you can call it, but so a lot of times for the teams that we're working with, they could be platform teams and they're creating services or enablements for internal teams. They might be creating APIs, or they're creating run books or those kinds of things. But those things are still being used by somebody, and it's like, how much information do you provide them? How do they want to use them? In what context? And so we always strive from this idea of there's somebody trying to get value, or somebody trying to get some kind of outcome, and it's always about that outcome and the simplest thing to get the outcome. If the
user may change at various points, it may not always be your end user, but it could be a developer or someone else in the organization that needs that product that you're building.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, and I'm not, by all means, I'm not bagging on the Agile space. I've done enough there, and Agile's a nice thing. But I think what a lot of people get wrapped up around is they get too fixated on the things to do to get the outcome and not the outcome. They lose sight of the forest from the trees. Mm-hmm. And the thing we stress with a lot of these teams is, like, we might not even quote unquote break down stories. We might just talk about the outcome we want to get to. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is, by building a little bit of the outcome, you learn more about what could be done. And so we never want to get too fixated on what to do right now. We want to learn how to get to better outcomes.
Okay.
And that also creates this freedom for the team to be creative. And so now we're trying to unlock creativity. We're trying to unlock learning by not fixating on the minutia, but we're focusing on really small, kind of interesting outcomes. And sometimes just that language and that framing helps teams free up ideas.
Gotcha. So there's definitely a competition between, like, seeing the big picture and working on a single problem, and then getting bogged down in minutia, and it's clearly a balance there, right? And it's like, I can see the big picture around delivering the feature, but I also have to write these lines of code. Yep. So, and then also seeing how my project fits into the bigger picture for the organization, perhaps. Yeah. So I can imagine that being a really interesting to help people gain different perspectives there, and maybe tune their philosophy based on how they're working, or is that part of it?
Yeah, it tunes the philosophies based upon how they're working, upon how they prioritize. Sometimes it even kind of rolls up higher. There's been plenty of times where somebody will come to a team and they'll have, we need you to do this thing. We need you to implement this feature, create this stuff. And then you kind of push back. You don't push back to be rude, but you just kind of say, well, like, I get the idea. What's the purpose? Kind of like, what are we trying to get out of this? Oh, I don't know. Just do the feature. I had one group, and I think this will make sense. So imagine, without giving too much away, imagine your internet was down. That'd be a bad thing, especially like these days.
Yeah. Right. Oh my.
Yeah. And so you call
the water.
Yeah. Game over. Right. Right. And so you'd call up the call center and you'd say, hey, my internet's down. And what this one product owner had the idea was, well, when they call in for the internet being down, we're going to sell them HBO. And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting idea. Like, why would you think that's a good idea? And it's because, well, we need to sell more HBO. And I go, have you talked to any customers? Like, what do you think will happen if you do this? And like, we didn't even talk to the customers. We talked to the agents, and the agents were like, "Oh, please don't do this. They hate us already." Right. Don't make
taking a customer that's already angry.
Yeah.
And like, now I'm like, hey, you're not happy with this, but would you like us to give us more money? That would be great.
Exactly. I know you can't watch it right now, but when the internet's back and you can watch HBO, would you like to watch it?
Right.
But so like that wasn't a team problem. That was, we actually had to kind of go outside the team and help people rethink around how they were doing things. And so the ultimate thing they wanted to do was they wanted to increase revenue by selling other options. Okay, cool. That's an interesting problem, and I get it from a company. Economics. You need to sell things. But like, just saying like that's the thing to do, and I know we're going to be successful, so just do it, it's walking blindly, and it's not a good idea. Mm-hmm. And so we have to rethink people around how they approach problems, even outside the teams, and help them frame up how they want to think about things and how they want to do their work.
Gotcha. So definitely you try to work with the entire organization, not just, the dev teams and the DevOps teams, but, and is it part of that improving relationships as well within how does that apply? Is there a way that you build relationships between teams and to, structures and stuff like that?
There's a lot of things going on in that space. One is I don't think a lot of organizations are set up. I don't think a lot of organizations realize how poorly they're set up to deliver value to their customers. I think that's just a fundamental kind of misgiving. A lot of organizations, you've been there for 5 years. You should have more people report to you. I don't know if that's a good way of doing things, right?
Right. Yeah. Maybe their skills lie elsewhere.
Yes. And so a lot of things that we do is, Woody does this really nice thing. And he says, how everybody says, well, how big should the team be? Are they too big? Those kinds of things. And he says, like, if we are constantly getting stopped trying to finish something because we have to go ask for more information or ask for permission or ask for those kinds of things, the team might not be right. We might have to change the team or change the structure. And on the flip side, the team could be too large if people feel like they're not able to contribute, either learn or actually contribute. And I think that's a nice way of balancing things. And so what we do with these teams, and we're always trying to learn things while they're building their product, right? I mean, because one of the fundamental things we want to do is we can't separate learning from work. Like, I had one organization, as a quick aside, I think they have the most AWS certified architects, blah, 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 kind of in the world. Yeah, pretty fancy thing to say, but like none of them could deploy anything. Like, they could not deploy anything to the cloud because the test does not match what they did inside their organization. And so it didn't matter that they passed all these tests. And so the thing we stress with them is we have to learn how to do things in your world. And you have to do it in your work. But anyway, coming back to that, we want these teams to be able to build their product and learn new ideas and new skills as they go. And so if we do this kind of single piece flow, the single piece focus, if they can't finish it, then that's not, we can build relationships and we can do kind of short-term things around, hey, can we borrow somebody? Can somebody give us context? But ultimately, this is kind of the outside the team learning. This is an organizational learning that says something's wrong here. We need to fix the team structure. And so it's a long-winded story to say sometimes we do build relationships, but a lot of times what ends up happening is we help organizations by using this learning thread. We help them realize the friction that's happening and help them learn how to build kind of like the right structure, like a better structure. Plenty of other things get in the way, legacy architecture, right? Kind of boundaries, all those things get in the way. But at least what we're doing is, and those things can't be solved overnight, but at least we're learning what the essential problems are and not just waiting for the next reorg and saying, now we have synergies, right? We're saying these are the real problems.
Right.
Let's unravel these things piece by piece and then solve those things.
Cool. So thinking about the learning organization and thinking about, how we get people learning. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember my question now. So do you still think that in some organizations it's important to get those certifications, or are you really focused on like, hey, let's learn this on the job. This is tentatively going to be more effective for your application?
One group we're working with right now, I think there's a gentleman there that's working on from the Likely Learning organization. And I think he said it best, much better than I did. He said historically, the organization he's in, they always learned for potential. And he would say, because everybody would say, we're going to take these classes and these certifications because what if we need them in the future? What if we want to do this? What if we could do this? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn for actual needs. And I think that's a big difference. I'm not trying to. Well, I haven't met a certification I liked. I mean that's just kind of how that kind of goes.
Sure. Yeah.
If it helps resumes and helps people get hired, and that kind of HR problem, I'm not going to fault anybody for trying to do the right thing. It just sometimes people get too attached to the certification. Or they get too attached, or the certification is detached from reality, and that just frustrates people.
Yeah. Because then they've learned all these things that they want to now use.
Yeah.
And they come back to the job and those aren't available. It's not they're not like, oh, we're not going to use that. We're going to use this other thing. And like, well, I just learned about all these things.
Yeah.
Well, I want to put it into practice.
Yeah. People learn about all the newest Azure options or AWS services, and they come back and they can't use them. It's just frustrating.
Yeah. I've always loved the idea of just-in-time learning, where I learned the thing I need to do to get the next thing done, and I think that there's a lot of value in that, because then not only do you get to learn it, but then you get to immediately apply it. So I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, and even what we do with a lot of groups. So when we're focusing on learning, there's a lot of things we stress. We stress learning over delivery, which kind of freaks a lot of people out. But I mean, you have to. So what you have to stress that, because if you don't, then delivery pressures will crush anybody's opportunity to actually learn. It happens all the time. So we set up these kind of expectations, right? Typically, what happens, ironically enough, is that by slowing down to learn, you actually start fixing systemic problems, and teams get faster because they learn how to apply things the right way, or those kinds of things. Another thing we do, though, is we'll stress with teams, just because we solved it one way doesn't mean there's another way to do it. And so we might, it's happened numerous times, like we'll fix something, we'll figure out a new way of deploying something, and then we'll throw it away. And we'll say, what's another way we want to try? And now after we do that, let's compare those two different ways of doing something. We had one group that we're working with that wanted to do some code refactoring, and they were doing a lot of if-else statements, all those kinds of things. And so at first they said, well, what if we did a design pattern and did some kind of factories and did that way? Okay, that's an option. Another option is using some enumerations and comparing it that way and just figuring it out that way. And so we did the enumeration first, and the team was happy. They said the code felt clean, it did what it needed to do. And I said, okay, cool. Instead of moving on, let's try there's no finish line that we have to rush to. Let's spend another hour and let's try the factory approach. And then we can actually make a decision. They tried the factory approach. After an hour, they felt like it was too complex, but now they could compare it. Before they would debate it for 4 hours. Right. This is why my design's better. This is why my design's better. No, let's just try it and then let's talk to it. It could be code. It could be the way you deploy things. It could be how we interact as a team. There's a million different ways. And so the thing we stress with these groups is let's try a couple different things and then actually talk about what was better. Crazy, right?
So why would I build it twice? Well, why would I argue about it for 4 hours instead?
Yes. Yeah. Let's have something to compare versus just, talk incessantly.
So you talked a lot about mob programming. Is that something you use very heavily? Is that something you use almost exclusively? Talk to me a little bit more about how you use that. With
every team that we take on this journey, we default to mobbing.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. And there's the natural hesitations, why is it going to be 5 people staring at a screen? We get past that pretty fast, right? People start to realize that it's actually really effective, and you start troubleshooting things and solving things really fast. One thing we'll tell teams is sometimes they get itchy, and they'll say, we feel like we could go faster if we split up. And then we'll do things like we'll tell them, let's test it out and come back and talk about what worked well as a mob, maybe what worked better as a pair. And so, but now we can compare these things. And so now the team starts to become aware, again, the kind of awareness factor of what problems make sense for us to work in different ways. And so now they have that kind of empowerment. Another thing we'll stress with teams is we'll mob by default until the work becomes easy. Until the work becomes easy and the learning becomes easy. And so like if we're doing single piece flow, and it becomes really easy where we all can do all parts of it, then having 6 of us working together as opposed to 3 of us working in things and just kind of coming back in this kind of sinusoidal wave, maybe that works better. But if the work is still really bumpy, where only one person can do this and only one person can do that, then we're not ready to break up yet. We have to be together. And so again, it's that awareness. Let's not try and be efficient, right? Let's not try and peg all the CPU cores at 100%.
Right.
and not get anything done. Let's not be Internet Explorer. Let's kind of, let's be something better.
Right. Yeah. If you're all going in different directions, it's different than all of you going in the same direction. One of the things that I didn't think about, but you brought up, was the knowledge islands, kind of.
Yeah.
And some people call it bus factor, whatever you want to work with. And I hadn't really thought of, I'm sure that's a huge component of mobbing, but that hasn't something that really occurred to me in the past. And that's super valuable. Yeah. So when you've got this team and this person, I know this piece of code really well, I'm going to work on these tickets, or I know this and I'm going to work on these tickets. And then when you start with mobbing, you kind of have to share that knowledge, and you end up with a team it's more fluid and better aware of the whole system. Yeah.
And we even do really nice things. Like we had a team that we just started with this week. And they were working on some Java code. And there was this one brilliant Java engineer. And by all means, he could have knocked out the code probably in an hour. But you're not going to type. Mm-hmm. You're going to be the navigator, and we're going to share ideas. And this person that doesn't know the code base is actually going to be working through the code. And she's going to ask you questions as she goes, because it's not that she's dumb. She's really smart, but she has ideas too. And so now we're raising everybody's game, because she's asking questions he hadn't thought of, because she has fresh eyes, and he has kind of biased eyes. And so, and along the way, they're all contributing and asking ideas. And it's just a really nice experience that at no point in time did anybody raise their hand and say, I don't want to be here. I want to go work on my tasks by myself. They were all super engaged because they were all contributing. Great. And that's awesome. It was it's a beautiful thing to see.
I bet the team came out of that really, excited and, melded together, right? There was a growth in the team itself. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a nice bonding effect. It's they learn things well. It's just a nice thing, especially especially right now where nobody really gets to kind of hang out too much. It's nice to have these moments together.
Have you found it some good platforms and ways to mob even in these times where everybody's virtual?
Usually we use Zoom a lot. We use live share through a VS Code plugin. Yeah, those work out pretty well. There's a Code Together we've used.
Okay.
I think it's more around the facilitation and kind of making sure everybody's voice is heard right now. Mm-hmm. I think everything's a little bit easier physically, but you do what you can.
Exactly. Yeah. So switching track just a little bit. So as a coach, you definitely strike me as a really impressive coach. Is there a goal? Do you have a goal to raise up coaches within the organization, kind of to do your work in a way, not to put you out of a job, but you're only one person, right?
Yeah.
Is that something you focus on?
Yeah, wholeheartedly, man.
Okay.
Nothing about any organization that I've helped out or worked with, but I don't want to be there too long. But here's the thing, though. Even if I love the organization and I want to stay there forever, it's not good for them. It's not good for them for a variety of reasons. Cost, right? It's always better to have your own employees. Mm-hmm. They have to invest in their own employees. The part of learning is growing your own employees. But the other factor of it is it looks really bad for an organization if they say, we want to be a learning organization, but none of our people are good enough to do it. So we're going to have somebody here for 2 and 3 years to make sure you all learn. That doesn't look good.
Right.
And so right off the bat, if there aren't identified coaches that are going to, in essence, replace me, then I'm looking on the teams I'm working with right off the bat. And there's always somebody that gets really excited and says, man, this is really fun. How do I do more of this? And then they naturally come in. And it's not that anything I do is magical, but people get excited because they felt like somebody created something for them that sparked something in them. And I want to be able to give that spark to somebody else. And if I can get people that want to do that, man, let's do that. And they'll all do a better job than I will. Let them, because they know the domain, they know the people, know relationships. They're better than I am.
Mm-hmm. Do you often come in and get this started and then come back occasionally to refresh, or how does that typically work?
Typically, I'll go in and get it started, and then I'll move on, and I'll still stay in touch with people if they have questions.
Mm-hmm.
But like a lot of these places get pretty self-sufficient on their own.
Mm-hmm.
They find their own way. The only thing, what's
Go
that?
ahead. I thought I heard an interview with Woody once where he was saying, he decided to leave a job when he realized that everybody was doing fine without him. Like they were all doing what they needed to do. And he's like, okay, I've done, he worked there, but he was like, all right, it's time for me to find something new because I've done what I wanted to accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. The thing I'll stress with people that are trying to coach in this space is the goal is never for them to mimic me, right? And I think that's hard and it kind of actually flies in the face of the certification stuff as well, because like the goal is never to kind of like check the boxes and follow the process. What I'll tell coaches is that they'll go through like their own process on their own. At first they won't know what to do, and so there's kind of watching and kind of learning it, and then 9 times out of 10, and it's not a knock on anybody, they will default to doing exactly what I do, and they'll kind of take you'll see, and they'll take the same postures and language and a lot of hand waving that they do, all that kind of stuff. But at some point in time, they need to get to the point where they've internalized it, and we stress a lot of these things where they need to understand kind of the essence of creating the moments and creating the learning and how to get people thinking about it. And as long as they know where they're going, as long as it doesn't matter how they get them there, right? And so it's almost like free-form jazz. You have to learn how to play a little bit. You have to play some songs, and then you start improvising. You can't go from never playing an instrument to saying now I'm a jazz player and say it sounds good. It just doesn't work that way. So with all the coaches, we want them to kind of think through this, kind of understand the intention. Maybe you're mimicking it for a little bit, but you have to internalize it on your own to be able to create these moments, and then you'll end up doing it better than we did.
That's fantastic. Are there any parts of growing a learning organization, of what you do that we haven't really touched on yet? Anything that we've been missing so far that you think would be good to discuss?
What happens in most organizations, and this is always a fun part, is a lot of organizations bring us in to work with teams, and that's good. That's where it's at. Probably 90% of the organizations that we go into, it never stops there. So what I mean by that is at some point in time, you get enough data where you start saying we need to have executive level learning experiences. We need to have middle management level learning experiences. And again, it's not that they're bad or wrong. It's just that we need to create these learning moments. So a lot of organizations that are large are kind of disconnected from reality. The people that they think they know how the work works, but then there's the people doing the work and they know how it actually works. And we start collecting data and this feedback. We start saying things like, this is bad. How could we rethink about how we approach this? To give you an example, I had one group that I was working with. They were using some code that was written by another team, pretty standard kind of stuff. And so we're trying to learn how to do some test-driven stuff, and we're trying to write some new code for a new feature. And then they're stuck because they're convinced that the code that they're dependent on isn't working right. And so they go, okay, let's debug it. And so we start working on debugging it. And after about an hour or two, it's like, okay, hold on a second. Why don't we just, ask somebody from the other team, because we're mobbing on this, right? And so there's 5 of us. It's like, instead of spending 10 hours, is there somebody we could go ask for 30 minutes and kind of knock us out?
Help us understand.
Yeah, pretty easy and obvious. And they go, no, we can't do that. I go, well, why can't we do that? Well, because it's not budgeted that way, and so they can't. Their project won't allow them to do these kinds of things. And I go, that's interesting. And so that's not a team problem. That's an organizational problem. And so now we have to have learning moments with executives that say, let's talk about the cost of how you do business.
Right.
And so you're spending 10x on this thing because it's penny wise and pound foolish, right? And so that's the kind of the challenge. But I don't think. If you asked anybody, they would tell you, well, no, that's not how it's designed to work. Nobody would design a system that says, make everything 10 times more expensive.
Right.
And so we have to work with now executives to say, how do you get better information to make better decisions that's more connected to reality? And so now we have to create those learning moments. So that's the biggest thing I would stress is we always work with teams. That's fun. But fundamentally, there's a lot more stuff that has to happen. It's usually kind of up and outside the team.
Gotcha. Changing the organization throughout the structure, not just at the team level.
Yeah.
That's really valuable.
Yeah. A lot of groups, a lot of organizations, and a lot of leadership talk about wanting to change their culture. It's kind of the big thing these days. We're creating a better culture. There's right. Put that on a sticker.
Right.
I think it was a gentleman, Niels, I probably pronounced his last name wrong, Niels Flegling, a gentleman from Germany. And he was saying that the culture is a shadow. It's a shadow of the way we work. And I was like, that's a really nice way of looking at it. And his point was, you can't work on, like, if you want to lose weight, you can't cut your shadow and make your shadow look better, right? You can't just say, if only my shadow was skinnier, I'd be better, right? You actually have to work on the thing, and the byproduct of making the way that you work better is a better culture. You can't just sprinkle some magic Google dust on it and now have a good culture. You have to change the way work works. I think that's a nice thing to think, and that's a nice thing to work with leadership and executives on is, you want this other thing, but what are the things that are holding it back, and let's make the work better.
And so something that comes to mind, I watched a little bit of your talk on this, and you mentioned one of my favorite quotes was, what's the difference between a failure and a learning experience? Well, the failures are the expensive ones.
Yeah.
The cost, right?
Yeah.
And so you also mentioned that, people say we want to be like Netflix, we want to be like Spotify, but the trouble is that they're there because they've made all these mistakes.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I really love that idea, and how the mistakes are part of what get us there.
Yeah, it's the Netflix and Spotify are good examples. It was even Toyota. Toyota open sources all of their ideas. And I forget, it wasn't Taiichi Ono, it was somebody else, but he was, why are you giving away the Toyota way? And his point was, because just because I'm giving you the state we're at doesn't mean you'll get the benefit of all the steps we learned to get there. And everybody's going to try and get there. And so the learning is always in the journey. It's never in the destination. For every organization that tries to do a paint by numbers transformation, it just doesn't work. Because not everybody is the same. Not everybody has the same domain. Not everybody has the same challenges. As much as we think we do, we're all in different places and we have different dynamics. And it turns out people are pretty finicky. And so the only thing we can do is get into this space where even the idea of transformation is wrong, right? This idea that today we're here and then tomorrow we're done because we transformed and so it's over. I like the idea of evolution. And as soon as you embrace that language, what happens is you're not worried about copying Spotify or copying Netflix. What all of a sudden you're thinking about is how do I do the 1% better every day that over the course of a year is exponentially better than trying to get 100% to tomorrow.
Right.
And that's what I want people to start thinking about is there's so many little things that we just need to be aware of. And then if you start embracing that, and and you're gonna learn things along the way. When you try and make this one little change, it's cheap and it's fast, and you learn quickly, whether it be process, people, or tech. You're gonna learn something really fast. That's much more effective than just saying we need to have tribes or whatever Spotify does these days, or Netflix has chaos engineering, so let's bring down production today. It's just not a good idea. The thing that I thought was really interesting, did you ever read the chaos engineering book from O'Reilly?
I've not read that one. I had some friends who were really into it, and I learned a little bit about it, but I've not read the book.
The original one, I think Nora Jones put out one recently, but there was one they put out about 4 or 5 years ago. And the thing that I think was so interesting about it, people are copying chaos engineering, and chaos engineering is awesome. Totally get that. But if you read the small book, they created chaos engineering because they said the systems were too complex to understand. And so they created it as a vehicle to help them understand complex systems better. And so they wanted to get to a point where they could experiment and learn quickly And the only way they could experiment and learn quickly was by having confidence that the things that they wanted to do weren't going to have catastrophic results.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, everybody lost that piece of it. They did it because they wanted to learn faster and they wanted to learn safely. Everybody misses that piece. It wasn't about resiliency. They got that as a byproduct, but it stemmed from this fact that they wanted to learn faster and they wanted it to be safe. And again, I just think all these nice little things, if people just stopped worrying about the outcome, if people stopped worrying about I want to be them, and they wanted to just be better themselves, that's a better way of doing it. And it's easier and it's less stressful.
Right. Yeah. We may dream about being this other person or this other company, but wouldn't it just be awesome to be a better me or be a better, I love that idea.
And the other thing is like, so hypothetically say Spotify is awesome. Say they're the pinnacle of anything ever. Nobody can be better than Spotify. And you decide you're going to copy them. Okay. It takes you 5 years to get there. I guarantee you Spotify's better. So now are you copying them again? And so now you're not improving, right? You're continuously copying.
You're chasing.
Yeah. And, it's not fun, but it's also exhausting. Like it's not good.
Like, what have they done in the past 5 years? And now we're going to catch up to that. And then 5 years later. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then, all you have to do is get new certifications at that point in time. And then nobody wants that.
Yeah. I'm going to take the old ones off my LinkedIn. Nobody wants that a Flash certification anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Or what? Shockwave, wasn't that the thing too, or something?
Yes. Oh yeah. Or Cold Fusion.
There you go.
Cold Fusion.
Yeah, those are hot these days. So.
Right. Anything else that you'd like to talk about, Joel? I think this has been amazing, and I really enjoyed it. What else would you like to impart to some of the viewers?
I'll tell you this one thing. For organizations that get excited about learning, I'm sure you hear this in all the DevOpsy spaces, right? But like this idea of psychological safety isn't a hippie and flowers and hugs and kisses kind of thing. It's a fundamental reality. Like in a lot of organizations, we create structure to make it safe to learn. Like that's one of the first things we have to do. Like I mentioned around telling organizations, learning over delivery. Like we create all this structure and this framework. Or I'm sorry, all these I want to say process, but this space where teams it's okay to learn because
just learning means mistakes.
Learning means a lot of mistakes. It means a lot of mistakes. But if it's not safe to learn, if it's not safe to make mistakes, it's not safe to learn. And in a lot of organizations, they'll say, "Oh, it's fine," but man, it's not. It's not. If you miss your deadline,
the blame comes down.
Yeah, if you miss your deadline because you learned, nobody buys that, man. Bad things happen. And then the funny thing is, people want innovation. They want creativity. Why aren't we creating the new ideas of the world? Well, because we can't be wrong. Because if we get wrong, I get marked down on my PMP review or some other kind of nonsense. Right? It's not a good system to be in. And so we have to fundamentally rethink about if we're making it safe for people to learn and experiment. If you're not, man, I wouldn't try. I would try to make it safe. I wouldn't try the learning stuff until we get to a point where it's okay.
Right. So it's almost an idea of rewarding people for success is great, but let's also reward people for ambition. You know, for trying something new that had promise and maybe just didn't quite pan out the way they expected. But if innovation is what we're trying to encourage, then we're going to have to really embrace those. A lot of the flameouts. It's like it reminds me a little bit of like the startup mentality with VCs and stuff, where they're like, yeah, 90% of these are going to die, but I just want to get my 100x payout on the other 10%.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great way of looking at it too. Make it easy for people to learn, make it easy for people to kind of experiment and grow from there. I mean, it's just, I think that's fundamentally what we need to do.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that idea. I love the idea of learning how to learn and falling in love with learning. that's one more thing that came to mind is do you, when you're teaching people about creating a learning organization, is there any specific focus on learning how to learn? And is that something that you try to teach people?
I wouldn't say we teach it overtly or explicitly. It kind of happens, and because people learn things in a lot of different ways, and so what we end up showing is a lot of different mechanisms for learning. Sometimes it's mobbing, sometimes it's repetitive exercises, sometimes it's visualization, sometimes it's talking through things. Sometimes for as rough as kind of online curriculum can be, I mean, sometimes that's the right way to start. I'm not going to have anybody spend 4 days investing in it, but if we're in a brand new space and we don't know anything about it, spending an hour to collectively, going through some exercises and then talking about, now that we heard this and we saw this, what are some questions we have? What do we want to try as a group? Sometimes having that kind of stuff is way. So we'll talk to people around showing different mediums and mechanisms to approach learning, but the fundamental thing is making them aware and kind of making them aware of those of the learning moments. As soon as you become aware, hey, this is something interesting. Let's kind of dive into it a little bit, and it's not about analysis paralysis or rabbit holing things. It's about this is one fundamental thing. Let's explore it a little bit. Let's try it a couple of ways and let's talk about it. Once teams get good at that, like Woody said, then I'm done. There's nothing more I can do. Once teams get it, man, good things happen.
That's well done for you. I imagine that feels wonderful. It just feels like, wow, I have really changed this organization, and they are going to be better in the future because of it. Yeah,
I mean, so it would be, but I mean, the reality is all every organization out there already has brilliant people. The only thing I really do is might try to sound trivial here, but the only thing I really do is kind of let them do it. I kind of set up a little bit of structure, and then all of a sudden they do all the hard work. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll teach concepts. I'll teach domain-driven design or product thinking, or I'm more than happy to do those things. But the reality is they're doing all the work. We just have to let them do it. Let them be aware that they can do it, and then they can do it all, man. I've yet to meet a group where it was like, oh, this group's bad news. It doesn't happen because people are pretty smart. So, and
when you give them that opportunity, that they really grasp onto it.
Yeah, and then they carry it forward, and people are just in a better spot. So it's don't get me wrong, it's definitely rewarding to see people happier with what they're doing and kind of feel more connected. But that's much more on them than it is on me. I give them the credit more so than myself.
Thank you, Joel. That's great. So, Joel, it's been wonderful talking with you, and really appreciate you taking the time today. Is there anything you want to leave people with so they follow you? If they're interested in talking to you more about this, is there some place they should contact you?
Yeah, I mean, on Twitter is totally fine. My email address is fine. joel.tosi@dojoandco.com is fine. Anything like that, more than happy. So here's if anybody has questions, by all means, more than happy to talk about it. I'm probably horrible with this, right? But I'm not here to make money. I mean, don't get me wrong, I gotta feed my family. Right. But if people are trying things, I'd love to hear what people are trying. I'd love to, if they want to talk about things, I'm more than happy to talk about things. Don't worry about kind of budgets and POs. I'm just happy to, if people get excited about learning, man, I want to talk to them about it.
That's great. Cool. And thank you so much. And I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, you too, man. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.